Imagine sitting in a dimly lit observation room behind a piece of two-way glass. On the other side sits a subject. To the untrained eye, they look perfectly calm. They are sitting comfortably, perhaps smiling slightly, hands relaxed on the table. They look like they are in complete control of the room. But you aren't looking at the smile. You are watching the hyperfocal tracking of their eyes. You are watching the tiny micro-muscle twitches at the outer corners of their eyelids, what we call the orbicularis oculi, which are completely static, proving the smile is a mechanical construct, a behavioral mask. You are watching the slight, almost imperceptible swallowing motion of their throat, and the way their breathing shallowly shifts from the diaphragm to the upper chest. They aren't calm. They are running a complex, high-bandwidth diagnostic program in their head. And they are terrified. Why? Because the person who used to occupy the empty chair across from them, the person who loved them, who predicted their needs, who absorbed their emotional volatility, and who validated their manufactured identity, has just walked out. And they didn't slam the door. They closed it quietly, with a soft, definitive click. This is the exact moment the behavioral matrix of a narcissist begins to crack. When a narcissist hurts someone who truly loved them, they expect a predictable menu of human reactions. They expect tears. They expect screaming. They expect long, desperate paragraphs sent at 3 a.m. They expect you to try to make them understand how much they hurt you. To a narcissist, all of those reactions, even your deepest agony, are valuable currency. It is proof of their gravity. It is proof that they are the center of your universe, the sun around which your emotional life orbits. But what happens when you change the variables in their equation? What happens when the emotional stimulus they rely on to define their own existence simply stops? Most people believe a narcissist fears being exposed to the world, or that they fear losing their reputation. Those are merely surface-level anxieties. The true primal dread, the monster that keeps them awake in the dead of night, staring at the ceiling when the lights go out, is far more chilling. It is a psychological horror that threatens their very survival. Over the next few minutes, we are going to pull back the curtain on this behavioral profile. We are going to deconstruct the exact mechanics of their mind, strip away the theatricality of their manipulation, and look directly at their fatal flaw. You are about to learn what happens when a predator realizes they have lost their hold on the one person who kept them anchored to reality, and how your quietest choice can become their greatest psychological nightmare. If you have ever been discarded, betrayed, or deeply hurt by a narcissist, your instinct was likely to fight back, to demand answers, or to make them see the depth of your pain. You wanted to force them to feel the agony they inflicted on you. I am here to tell you that this is the exact behavioral trap they wanted you to step into. In the next 10 minutes, I am going to show you why your pain is actually their psychological fuel, and why the ultimate threat to their survival is something you have likely been holding back. We are going to dissect the hidden subterranean fears of the narcissistic mind, not to psychoanalyze them for their benefit, but to hand you the analytical keys to your own freedom. If you turn away from this speech early, you will likely continue running the same old behavioral loops, handing over your emotional leverage to someone who uses it against you. But if you stay until the end, you will understand the precise psychological formula to render their manipulation entirely powerless. To understand what a narcissist fears, you must first understand how they survive. They operate on a closed-loop system of emotional feedback. Unlike a psychologically healthy individual who possesses an internal sense of self-worth, a narcissist has a hollow core. They are a black hole that requires external validation, attention, and reaction to prove to themselves that they exist. When they hurt you, when they gaslight you, minimize you, or abruptly discard you, they are testing their boundaries and confirming their influence over your nervous system. If you cry, if you beg, or even if you rage text them in anger, your nervous system is firing in response to them. You are telling them, you have power. You are the author of my state of mind. This is why, immediately after hurting you, they monitor you closely. They look for micro signals of your distress. They check your social media. They send vague, baiting text messages. They look for any indication that your emotional energy is still flowing in their direction. But what happens when they look for those signals and find absolutely nothing? This brings us to the narcissist's ultimate primal fear, your absolute, unwavering indifference. To a narcissist, the opposite of love is not hate. Hate is still an investment. Hate is still a high-energy emotion that binds you to them. If you hate them, they still own a piece of your mental real estate. The opposite of love is nothingness. When you truly loved them, you gave them the purest, most stable form of validation. You saw past their flaws. You accepted their manufactured mask. You built them up. When they hurt you, and you respond by quietly, clinically, and permanently removing yourself from their life, you initiate what is known as a narcissistic mortification. Without your reactions, they are forced to look inward. And when a narcissist looks inward, they do not see a stable, confident adult. They see a fragile, deeply wounded, undeveloped child surrounded by an ocean of shame. Your silence acts as a sensory deprivation chamber. It starves their ego of the oxygen it needs to maintain the illusion of their superiority. The moment you stop reacting, you become a black box to them. In behavioral profiling, a black box is an entity whose inputs are known, but whose internal processes and outputs are completely unpredictable. When you stop explaining yourself, stop defending your character, and stop reacting to their bait, the narcissist experiences a severe spike in anxiety. Their brain begins to ask high-stress questions. What are they thinking? Why aren't they angry? Have they seen through me? Have they moved on to someone better? Because they can no longer read your emotional state, they lose their sense of predictability. And in the mind of a manipulator, a loss of predictability equals a complete loss of control. They realize that the person who once loved them, the person they took for granted, has stepped entirely outside of their field of influence. You have effectively rewritten the rules of the game and left them standing alone on an empty board. Reclaiming your power does not require a grand gesture, a dramatic confrontation, or a clever speech of your own. In fact, those things only signal to the narcissist that you are still playing the game. Your greatest asset is your absence. When you make a clean break, when you block the numbers, ignore the mutual contacts, and treat their existence with the same emotional weight as a stranger passing on the street, you execute the most devastating psychological move possible. You expose the truth that they are not the center of your universe. You prove that your value, your peace, and your future were never dependent on their validation. They feared your silence because they knew that within that silence lay your healing. And once you heal, you become permanently immune to their influence. Treat your attention as the incredibly valuable resource it is. Stop spending it on a ghost and start investing it entirely back into yourself. To understand the precise architecture of a narcissist's attachment style, we must first discard the standard humanized vocabulary of love, connection, and mutual respect. These concepts do not exist within their behavioral operating system. When a narcissist targets you, they are not performing a standard human valuation. They do not look at your intelligence, your empathy, or your kindness as traits to be appreciated for their own sake. Instead, they view you through a strictly utilitarian lens. You are a mirror. You are an external psychological prosthetic designed to stabilize an otherwise fragile, highly volatile internal ego. The healthy human brain operates with an internal feedback loop that self-regulates self-esteem, identity, and emotional security. The narcissistic brain completely lacks this internal mechanism. It requires constant external calibration. It must look outward to see itself. When you love them, your adoration, your compliance, and even your desperate attempts to fix the relationship served as a flawless, highly polished, reflective surface. When they looked at you, they did not see you. They saw a projection of their own manufactured grandiosity, power, and desirability. You were the physical proof that their false persona was real. Your primary function was to continuously bounce back a curated image of their supremacy, absorbing their toxic outputs while remaining a stable, predictable, reflective panel. When they hurt you, they are testing the tensile strength of this mirror. They are looking for microsignals, the dilation of your pupils in fear, the subtle micro-tremors in your voice, the desperate paragraph sent in the middle of the night, to confirm that the glass is still reflecting their influence. But when they cross a line and the mirror is shattered or completely removed from their environment, the psychological consequences are immediate and severe. When you stop reflecting their grandiosity, when you look at them with cold, analytical detachment or simply turn away, the mirror goes dark. In behavioral terms, this is a catastrophic system failure. They are suddenly thrust into a state of sensory and psychological deprivation. Without your reflection, they have no baseline to determine who they are. The terrifying reality they have spent a lifetime running from, the hollow, chaotic void at their core, begins to bleed into their conscious awareness. They do not grieve the loss of you as an individual. They grieve the loss of the stabilizing feedback loop you provided. The panic they exhibit is not the heartbreak of a lost love, but the existential dread of an addict whose supply has been abruptly cut off, or a pilot whose instrument panel has suddenly gone completely black in the middle of a storm. This loss of self-stabilization triggers an immediate, desperate search for a replacement reflective surface. They will cycle through frantic behavioral patterns, ranging from hoovering tactics and manufactured emergencies to sudden, aggressive smear campaigns, all designed to force you back into the role of the mirror, or to project their internal chaos onto someone else before their psychological structure collapses entirely. They are terrified of the silence that follows your departure, because in that quiet, unreflective space, they are forced to confront the absolute nothingness of their own unmasked identity. Every action they take after hurting you is a desperate attempt to patch over this cracked interface, to trick their own nervous system into believing they still have a grip on the reality you once anchored for them. To fully grasp the mechanics of the silent shift, you must first understand that a narcissist's entire behavioral model is built on provocation. They are emotional chess players who rely on your moves to plan their next attack. When they hurt you, they expect a reaction. They expect you to scream, to cry, to defend your character, or to demand an explanation. In their mind, any emotional output from you, even your deepest, most agonizing pain, is a transaction. It is a form of currency that validates their importance. When you scream at them, your nervous system is firing in response to their actions. When you cry, you are confirming that they have the power to alter your physical and emotional state. Even your hatred is an investment of energy. It tells them that they still occupy prime real estate in your mind. This reaction is what keeps their psychological engine running. It assures them that they are the center of your universe, the sun around which your life orbits. But when you execute a hard, quiet pivot into absolute indifference, you disrupt their entire operational matrix. The power of the silent shift lies in its complete lack of friction. It is not an aggressive act of retaliation. It is a clinical, quiet withdrawal of your attention. You simply cease to engage. When they bait you, you do not bite. When they lie about you, you do not defend yourself. When they try to pull you into a familiar argument, you meet them with a flat, neutral gaze and absolute silence. In the field of behavioral profiling, this is the ultimate pattern interrupt. By refusing to provide the expected emotional payload, you starve their behavioral feedback loop. The narcissist's brain is highly sensitive to changes in attention dynamics. When you stop reacting, their threat assessment system goes into overdrive. They look at you and see a blank wall where a highly responsive target used to be. This sudden, absolute quiet registers in their subconscious not as peace, but as a terrifying form of psychological non-existence. Because they have no internal sense of self, they require your reactions to prove to themselves that they exist and have impact. Your indifference tells them that they have become completely irrelevant. This irrelevance is their absolute worst nightmare. It is a cold, clinical demonstration that they no longer have the power to affect your nervous system. They can scream, they can lie, they can smear your name. But if you do not react, it is as if they are throwing punches at the wind. The energy they expend simply dissipates into the empty air, leaving them exhausted and exposed. Without your emotional feedback to ground them, they are forced to confront the immense, hollow silence of their own inner void. They begin to experience a severe form of cognitive panic. They will try harder to get a rise out of you, escalating their behavior, throwing tantrums, or playing the victim, all in a desperate bid to get just a single spark of anger or sadness from you. But if you maintain the silent shift, if you remain entirely cold and unresponsive, they are left to drown in their own toxicity. Your quiet, resolute indifference becomes a mirror that reflects only their own desperation, forcing them to realize that they have lost their hold on you completely and permanently. To understand the depth of this dread, we must analyze the mask not as a casual metaphor for deception, but as a highly sophisticated, survival-essential psychological camouflage. The narcissist's entire life is a theater production, where they are both the director and the lead actor, desperately trying to convince the audience, and more importantly, themselves, that the character they are playing is real. This character is powerful, enviable, bulletproof, and deeply superior. The tragedy of their existence is that beneath this elaborately constructed exterior lies a fragile, underdeveloped ego that is entirely incapable of processing shame, weakness, or failure. When they inflict severe harm on you, they are operating under the assumption that their mask is still fully operational, shielding their true nature from view. But when the dust settles from their destructive behavior, a critical shift occurs in the victim's perception. For the first time, you are no longer looking at the character, you are looking at the actor. You are looking at the seams of the costume, the desperation in the script, and the hollow emptiness behind the eyes. This shift is instantly detected by the narcissist's hyper-vigilant threat assessment system, triggering a state of profound cognitive panic. Their brain enters a high-state threat assessment because they realize they have lost control of the narrative. In behavioral profiling, we monitor the subject's autonomic nervous system responses when they suspect their cover has been blown. The narcissist's heart rate spikes, their breathing becomes shallow, and their cognitive bandwidth is entirely consumed by one terrifying question: do they see me? They are not worried about your pain, nor are they feeling guilty for the harm they caused. Their terror is entirely self-referential. They are terrified that you have decoded their behavioral patterns, mapped their insecurities, and realize that the monster tormenting you is actually an incredibly small, frightened child wearing a giant, menacing shadow. If you see through the mask, the power dynamic is permanently inverted. You now possess the ultimate weapon, the truth of their inadequacy. They realize that they can no longer manipulate you using the old protocols because you are now immune to the illusion. You see the machinery behind the magic trick, and once a magic trick is understood, it can never mystify you again. This fear of exposure drives them into a defensive posture that is highly revealing. They will watch your face for any sign of contempt or pity. To a narcissist, your pity is far more damaging than your anger. Anger validates their strength. Pity confirms their pathetic nature. They will analyze your micro-expressions, looking for a cold, knowing look, the slight asymmetric raise of the upper lip that signals contempt, or the relaxed, unbothered posture of someone who is no longer intimidated. When they detect this shift, their brain perceives it as an existential threat. as if their very survival is being compromised. They know that if you share this unmasked reality with others, if you speak the truth without the emotional distortion they rely on, their entire social network and support system could collapse like a house of cards. They are forced to live in a state of perpetual hypervigilance, running frantic damage control behind the scenes, constantly scanning your behavior for signs that the secret of their emptiness is about to be leaked to the world, rendering them completely naked and powerless in an environment they can no longer control. To control a target, a manipulator must possess a highly accurate, predictable map of that target's emotional terrain. They rely on your high empathy because empathy is incredibly expressive, readable, and consistent. When you are highly empathetic, you wear your nervous system on your sleeve. Your facial microexpressions, your vocal pitch shifts, and your physical posturing are all highly visible data points. A narcissist continuously monitors this data to calibrate their next move, using your emotional transparency to keep you off balance. When they insult you, they look for the subtle downward tilt of your chin or the micro tremor in your voice that confirms their strike hit its target. This constant loop of action and reaction allows them to feel entirely secure in their dominance. But the moment you stop reacting to their carefully engineered provocations, you transition from a transparent system to what behavioral analysts call a black box. In profiling terms, a black box is a system where the internal mechanics and the resulting outputs are completely hidden from the external observer. When you become a black box, the narcissist continues to feed their usual toxic inputs into the system. A cutting remark, a deliberate delay in response, a manufactured crisis, or a direct threat, but the expected output never materializes. Instead of tears, anger, or frantic explanations, they are met with a flat, unwavering neutrality. Your voice does not crack. It drops to a low, steady, controlled register. Your eyes do not dart away in shame or widen in fear. They remain fixed in a calm, analytical gaze. Your physical posture exhibits no signs of autonomic arousal, no shallow chest breathing, no defensive folding of the arms, no fidgeting. This sudden decoupling of input and output completely shatters the narcissist's predictive model. The narcissistic brain is constantly running simulations to stay 3 steps ahead of its targets, relying on your predictability to maintain its illusion of control. When these simulations fail to produce accurate forecasts, the narcissist experiences a severe cognitive bottleneck. They cannot determine if your flat response is a mask for deep, calculated plotting, a sign of cold fury, or a complete and permanent detachment. This lack of information creates a profound sensory void. In human threat assessment, an unpredictable entity is infinitely more terrifying than a predictable enemy. Because they can no longer anticipate your next move, your silence is translated by their subconscious as a highly dangerous, active threat. This loss of predictability triggers a state of genuine cognitive panic. To regain control, they will frantically seek out new data. They will obsessively analyze your digital footprint, looking for any shift in your online patterns. They will drop baiting statements in conversation, watching your face with hyperfocal intensity for even a split-second micro-expression of anger or sadness that they can use to decode you. They might even escalate their abusive behavior to extreme levels, desperately attempting to force some form of behavioral output from you, any output, just to reset their psychological compass. When you deny them this data, when you remain a completely silent, unreadable black box, their anxiety spikes into sheer desperation, leaving them entirely blind, highly reactive, and completely stripped of their manipulative leverage. To understand the ultimate failure of the narcissistic structure, we must analyze the weaponization of neutrality, specifically through a behavioral framework known as the gray rock method. This tactic is not merely a passive defense mechanism. It is a calculated, strategic starvation of the narcissist's behavioral feedback loop. The narcissistic brain is a highly ravenous, attention-seeking engine that requires constant, high-impact emotional feedback to maintain its internal stability. They do not care if the feedback they receive is positive or negative, loving or hateful. They simply require the raw, energetic output of your nervous system to fuel their false sense of power. When you engage with them emotionally, even when you are screaming in righteous anger or defending your basic humanity, you are feeding this engine. You are validating their delusion that they are a highly significant force in your life. But when you adopt a state of total clinical neutrality, you transition from an active, expressive target to an inanimate, unreactive object. You become as boring, uninspiring, and completely unresponsive as a gray rock on the ground. Implementing this level of absolute neutrality requires a total suppression of your natural empathetic reflexes. When they attempt to provoke you, you do not respond with defensive arguments, explanations, or appeals to their conscience. You communicate, if you must communicate at all, in flat, factual, and incredibly brief sentences. Your voice is stripped of all emotional inflection, maintaining a completely monotone, unbothered cadence. If they ask you a complex, emotionally loaded question designed to drag you into a conflict, you answer with monosyllabic, non-committal responses like, "Okay, I see," or "perhaps." You offer no personal information, no glimpses into your emotional state, and no reactions to their insults or manufactured crises. By doing this, you present them with a completely sterile environment. You refuse to offer them any emotional friction whatsoever, which forces them to slide off your exterior without gaining any psychological traction. This total lack of feedback initiates a severe energy deficit within the narcissist's operating system. In behavioral science, when a reinforced behavior no longer produces the expected reward, the subject experiences what is known as an extinction burst. The narcissist will initially escalate their provocations, trying harder, louder, and more aggressively to break through your neutral exterior and force you to react. They might lob outrageous accusations, threaten to ruin your reputation, or alternate wildly between tearful pleas and cold rage. But if you do not flinch, if you remain completely flat and unbothered, their escalation hits a hard wall of indifference. The energy they expend on these intense provocations simply dissipates, leaving them entirely depleted. They are forced to absorb the full, unmitigated weight of their own toxic energy because there is no external target to catch it. This absence of feedback starves their ego, forcing them to look directly into the hollow, terrifying void of their own internal emptiness. A state of psychological panic they will do absolutely anything to avoid.